duel is becoming less frequent. But what Kardec means as duel is an old custom where, for example, if you get offended by someone, like in your honor, then you would uh, invite that other person who offended you to a duel. You would set a time and place. You would invite witnesses, and then you would fight that person to the death. Right? And this is an old custom that, fortunately has disappeared. Like we don't do that anymore. At least I won't believe in most places. But sometimes we still see this behavior of let's take this outside, which means that someone offended me, so I want to take this outside and resolve this with physical violence. And sometimes we still see that. And I think this is just another form of duel. It's just not is not very well accepted anymore in society, but we still see that from time to time. So duels, now I'm not being able to pass it on. I don't know what happened. Darius, can you help me? Okay. 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 All right. So in the spirits book, Kardec makes some questions to the spirits about the duel, and again, this is also approached in the Gospel according to Spiritism. But then Kardec asks, can dueling be considering a case of lawful self-defense? And the spirits respond that no, it's murder and an absurd custom worth of barbarians. I think that still applies today, like even if we don't do formal duels anymore, but committing an act of physical violence that can lead someone to death, that is still considered to be barbarian, and that's still considered a crime, even on human laws and the divine laws. They ask, can duly be considered a murder on the part of him who, knowing his own weakness, is almost certain to be killed? And the spirits are very succinct and straightforward, answering that it is suicide. So if you don't have ability in fighting, for example, and then you decide to face someone without knowing how to defend yourself, lead by episode of anger, and then if someone dies from that episode, that can be considered a suicide, right? Um, when the odds are equal, let's say there are two opponents that have similar abilities, is it murder or suicide? And the spirits again are very straightforward and succinct and say it is both, and saying that both are considered crimes under the divine law. And we go back to the same thing, the core reason. In dueling, what is the value of what's called the point of honor? Like my honor has been hurt, has been damaged. And again, that's just pride and vanity, two sources of humankind. And nothing is by chance. The message that Daniel read in the beginning came very in encounter of the theme of today. Like if someone points out something in you that needs remediation, we should take that as an opportunity to amend ourselves, to reflect and see what we can do to improve. But often what we do is when someone points out something in us that may need remediation, what we do is like we get our ego hurt, and then we may lead to anger. So I think it's very appropriate for the theme of today. Um, Going back about anger, you may ask, why do some people are more prone to anger than others? Is it their tempers? Like you may see some people that barely get angry, like they are seen as very calm and peaceful people. And there, I think everyone knows at least someone in their lives who they were afraid to talk to because anything could make them feel angry and shout at you. So is it their temper? So in the Gospel according to Spiritism, Kardec explains that we cannot blame that on our temper. because it's the same thing as blame that in nature, and which would mean blaming that in God. Like we are angry because God made us angry. That's not how it works. It's like blaming a car for an accident when it's actually, it may be the driver that was not a good driver and caused the accident. So in the gospel, the spirits clarify that be convinced that a peace loving spirit, even in an ill tempered body, will always be peace loving, whereas a violent spirit in an lymphatic body will not thereby be meeker. So, for example, if a thin person who is like an angry fellow, like he may not be able to inflict too much of physical violence, but that doesn't mean that that person is like a more peaceful person. It's just the violence will take a different direction. They may go into verbal violence and other forms of violence. And then the spirits clarify again that all virtues and all vices are inherent to the spirit. So what is of the spirit, that can be changed. So if you identify yourself as a person that has a bad temper, this is, you cannot blame that on your body, on your hormones, or on your gender. That's something that is inherent to your spirit. And when you identify that, again, as the initial message said, it's an opportunity for you to work on yourself and make yourself better. Um, Pointing out again that all our virtues and our vices are inherent to the spirit. We have to remember that our virtues and vices will attract spirits that have similar virtues and vices as us. Is that thing about the frequency and synchrony with the spiritual world and also with the people around us. Uh, so I will bring an example of the book Sex and Destiny by André Luiz, uh, which demonstrates an example of violence associated with obsession. So this book has a lot of characters, so I would not detail everything. Um, but one of the main characters is Claudio, who is a man who has an adopted daughter. And in the story, unfortunately, Claudio is thinking constantly of doing a violence to this adoptive daughter. And it is actually very serious because it's a form of sexual violence. Uh, and then André Luiz describes that there is a spirit very attached to Claudio, and this spirit he calls himself Moreira. And he actually describes this obsessive relationship as a vampires in a way that the obsessor can barely be distinguished from the person who is being obsessed. They are so attached together that all their acts of their lives are done in conjunction. Um, so there is a part of the book where Andrea knows that Claudio is thinking of committing this act of violence. He spent a few days thinking about it and actually planning how he's going to do it. And Andrea tries to the best of his ability to avoid that act of violence to happen. Um, so in one part, like Andrea disguises himself, like he changes his spirit to not look so evolved in the face of the obsessor. Then there is an interaction with the obsessor, and Andrea disguise and the obsessor, and they start to talk, and then the obsessor is initially very pleasant. And then when Andrea asks to enter the house, then there's some trigger in the obsessor that he starts to shout and essentially tells Andrea to go away. And I found it very interesting because um, Andrea describes exactly this. I had no choice but to hurry back down the stairs because he threatened me with clenched fists. Like, so he threatened Andrea with a sign of physical violence, like I'm going to punch you if you don't get off of here. So Andrea actually goes away. He has to flee because he lost his the ground that he was gaining with the obsessor. And then as the that chapter goes by, later at night, brother Felix, who is one of Andrea's instructor, comes and tries to help Andrea to avoid Claudio to commit that act of violence. Uh, and brother Felix does have some influence, but the relationship of vampirism is so strong that they cannot perceive it. So they describe as Claudio Moreira's vampires that they were interlaced in a mental swamp of lust so powerful that in that volcano of sexual appetites, it would be almost impossible to find the smallest opening through which one could try to inject the smallest lofty idea. So their relationship was so strong that it was very hard for the benefactor spirits like Andrea and Brother Felix to have some influence. And this is just to demonstrate how our thoughts have an influence in our acts and in our connection with the spirits around us, and how what we have the ability to change that by changing our thoughts, and again through prayer, how we can connect with a different frequency of spirits. Um, Indeed, during that chapter, after Andrea is, let's say, expelled by the obsessor from the house, like what Andrea tries to do is to influence other people in a way to protect the adoptive daughter to suffer that act of violence. So he tries to influence other people, like to call her, like to let her working later at night, something to try to protect her. But Andrea describes that he finds a lot of difficulty because there was no one that he could find that was having good thoughts. Like everyone was very focused on themselves, or there were some people having thoughts of sex and lust and materialism. So it was very hard for him to have an influence on these people. And he unfortunately could not avoid the act of violence that ended up happening. And ultimately led to the discarnation of the adoptive daughter. And to that part, Andrea points out that yes, like we are not perfect, and we will have different thoughts. I think throughout the day we may change our frequency of thoughts, and we have to be very vigilant. And Andrea gives, I think, something that is very consoling, and uh, is a very good directive in where he says, brothers and sisters, even if we cannot yet live holy lives to the inferior instincts that torture our souls, still animalize to the alpha burden of a guilt-ridden past. Minimize your moral failures as much as possible. Like give an effort to try to better yourselves as much as you can. And then he says, fathers and mothers, husbands and wives, children, siblings, friends, and companions whom you suppose are lost forever. Many our friends who have discarnated already, but who very often follow you closely, adding to your happiness and sharing your pain. When you're about to fall into the abysses of moral delinquency, think of them. They will help you benevolently and point out the way on the night of temptation, like stars scattering the darkness. So when you are tempted to something, like to do some wrongdoing, like you're feeling that urge, like reach out to for help through prayer, through your thought, and then be sure that that help will come to you, right? And our spiritual friends are there, and even like if you call for someone and then that person cannot come, like that the thought will reach someone who can help you, right? um, I will share a personal story. When I was a teenager, about 14, 15, and I think I didn't share this story with anyone, but I had there was this classmate who was bullying me consistently. And then there was this one day that I was very angry. And then I decided after boiling that inside myself, that I would punch his face, and then and then looking back, look at the influence of the good spirits, because at that exact time, my other classmates found me, and they obviously they saw that my face was not very friendly, and then they said, "What's going on?" And said, "No, calm down," and said, and things, nothing happened in the end of the day. But I'm sure that there were spiritual friends there that put in those classmates there, and know that someone doing good thoughts, thinking positively, that helped. So we don't know, we never realize how spiritual world influences in our lives. But to make the point that our good thoughts, they go a long way, more than we think, more than we realize. And this theme also got me thinking about criminals. So the week before, during my gospel at home, we were reading the last chapter, which is about prayers, and there is a prayer for the criminals. And there are criminals who are in jail that because they committed acts of violence, sometimes taking somebody else's lives. And it's very challenging for us to feel charity and compassion toward these criminals. But the gospel invites us to remember that they are also our brothers and sisters, and makes me remember during the crucifixion of Jesus that they had two, let's say, bad guys beside him, and one goes to him and asks for forgiveness, and Jesus says that because he repented, like, that person would be with him in his kingdom later that day, right? So the gospel invites to tell us that we do not have to say of criminals that they are wretched, they must be expunged from the earth. The death that is inflicted on them is too kind for that type of individual. Because if we say that, that is also an act of violence, and it doesn't make us any better than that criminal. We have to look at our model, who is Jesus. What would he say if he saw such unfortunate persons next to him? Like, he would have pity of them. He would feel compassion for them. He would try to educate them. And Kardec says you can at least pray for them, right? And assist their spirits in their few moments they must yet spend on your earth. Repentance may touch their hearts if you pray with faith. So again, the power of the prayer. And we have to remember that they are our neighbors, just as the best individuals are. So the prayer is very important, and influences not only our more nearest environment, but our most extended environment as well, if we pray like with the same intent. Um, and then that got me thinking about other types of violence that we still see, which is wars. Like, and there's a passage in the Gospel according to Spiritus that Kardec says that wars are essentially the duels from peoples to peoples, from nations to different nations, that we unfortunately still see, and we still see very present these days. In these times of crisis, when our faith is challenged, that is when I think we must pray more fervently to reach out to the good spirits, because the prayer can actually help, harmonize and solve these problems. We still need war in these days, I think, because we are not yet on the level that we are completely loving one another as we should. And when we actually reach a point in which the law of Jesus, the law of love and charity, is predominant, we will not need these types of lessons anymore. Uh, you may be thinking, are there wars also in the spiritual world? Because the spiritual world is made of all sorts of spirits. We have the most elevated spirits, we have the most inferior spirits. Like, we if you are a violent person while incarnated, not because you're discarnated, you're going to be a less violent person. So we care with ourselves, our virtues and vices, because again, they are inherent to the spirit. So to that point, very interestingly, there are some armamentarium, I would say, in the spiritual world as well, specifically in the book The Messengers, again by André Luiz, which is the sequel, the immediate sequel to Nosso Lar, Our Home. There is a few chapters where André Luiz describes this station called the aid station, which is located in the lower zones, let's put it like that, in the umbral. But it's a station that is run by good spirits, benefactor spirits, and that station is there, as the name says, to provide aid for the spirits that are being rescued from that zone. Um, I think of that like as the first emergency room, the door of entrance, right? And it's like a beacon of light in the middle of the darkness, I would say. And then André Luiz is very good in describing the spiritual world for us. And then in chapter 20, like when he is leaving the aid station, he looks it up and then he has a better view of the structure. So he describes it as a fortress with a defensive setup and armamentarium similar to cannons. And then he gets very curious and he looks at that with very interest. And then, like the instructor, Alfredo, explains to him, he says, well, you were impressed to see that here, right? And Alfredo explains that those armamentariums, those cannons, they are not developed to attack. They're not developed to attack, neither to exterminate, but to defend the work of the good in the aid station. He explains that because they are in the mid of a zone of inferior spirits, he says, don't think that because they are inferior, they are completely ignorant. They are spirits that are still planning of doing evil things. They have like great schemes, and they actually can go and attack. So we need to defend ourselves. He does say exact these words, but that's the context of the whole thing. And he explains that these spirits, like they still influence the spirits on earth because they're so close to the earth. They still influence people here to commit acts of violence and planning schemes to hurt other people, including leaders that will, guided by their greed, provoke acts of war. So they still need to defend themselves. And the Spirit Alfredo, the instructor, he explaining about those cannons, he says that they are armored with electric projectiles, and he says they are terribly frightening. But obviously, they won't kill, but they will cause a sensation of death to the spirit who is hit by it, because the spirit has a perispirit that is still so dense and so connected to the material world that being hit by those projectiles, they will have a sensation of death. That's why they say it's very frightening. But again, it's not armamentarium with the goal of conquer or to exterminate. It's essentially there to defend themselves and to protect the work of the good spirits in the aid station, so that station can go and keep running. And then Andrea says, why are they necessary? And Spirit Alfredo says, as long as the universal law of love does not prevail, it is imperative for the reign of justice to persist. So we need our defenses. They need that armamentarium. They hope that they don't have to use it, but the world is still being as it is. Like, we still need to have that to defend ourselves and to protect the work of the good. And then moving forward, the Spirit Alfredo tells Andre a very interesting Hindu fable, uh, which I'll try to tell here. So Alfredo tells that there was this Hindu master, I'd say, in India, who was considered a holy man, a very good man. And then that man was walking down a path, right? And then in that path, he finds a serpent, and the serpent threatens him to bite him. And then that Hindu master, he says, my friend, we should not attack or cause harm to anyone. Um, and then the serpent retreats itself. Then the Hindu master goes away. He continues on his path. And from that day on, the serpent had a change in their attitude. Essentially, the serpent became good. That he would not threaten anyone anymore. The serpent actually went to the village where it had attacked some people and asking for forgiveness. So for some time, things were going okay, but then the people started to abuse the serpent, like threaten the serpent, throwing them rocks, and obviously the serpent got very bitter about it, very upset about it. And then time went by, and then the Hindu master was doing his way back on the same path. And then he found the serpent again. And then the serpent tell him everything that had happened. Like say, well, I tried to change. I became like a better being, and I'm not attacking anyone. But then people are abusing me. Like I can't have peace anymore. And then the Hindu masters, my friend, I didn't say that you should not, show your teeth anymore or hiss anymore. What I said is that you should not attack anyone, but use your abilities to defend the work of the good. Whenever there is a threat, show your teeth, hiss to those people and cast them away. Like essentially saying you don't need to attack anyone, but you're still in a world that you need to defend yourself sometimes. Right? And how does that reflect with the teachings of Jesus? And we bring back the famous Sermon of the Mountain that is described in Matthew. And here I will point out two passages in which Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall possess the earth. And blessed are the peace loving, for they shall be called the children of God." And there is a chapter in the Gospel according to Spiritus dedicated to these two passages. So essentially, Jesus is promoting peace. I think it's the most explicit promotion of peace, I think, that Jesus makes during his teachings. And Kardec goes and develops that, saying that Jesus is essentially condemning any act of violence, anger, and even any discourteous expression regarding another person. Essentially says we should not even say something that is offensive, like a bad word to another person. And Kardec develops says that obviously things will depend on the context and on your intention, but the thing is, whenever you say something that is discourteous, it's a sentiment contrary to the law of love and charity. So we must, to the best of ourselves, avoid try to offend people, because that can lead to anger, violence, and that cycle that we already talked about. Right? And there is a very interesting book, psychographed by Chico Xavier, that's called Jesus in the Home. It's a very precious book. So this book essentially describes the meetings of Jesus with his apostles and disciples at the house of Simon Peter, and essentially describes some discussions that they had, and the discussions that they had regarding the teachings of the gospel. So on chapter 17 of this book, it's described a meeting that they had soon after the Sermon of the Mountain, and they were discussing essentially the part of blessed are the peace, are the peace loving and the meek, right? And it's very interesting because the disciples are okay. We understand that we have to be peace loving. We should not like offend anyone. We should not have acts of violence. But then they start questioning themselves and they say, would not such an assertion encourage mental idleness? Uh, how was it possible for good to win an immediate victory by means of inability to react, albeit peaceably? So essentially, the disciples were thinking, okay, how can we defend ourselves if we're going to just be there sitting peacefully and smiling to people? That was their interpretation, I think. And Jesus was like observing their thoughts. He knew what was going on through their minds, and he just sat there and observed it until like the apostles started to speak up, and then they described that Judas says, "Why did you attribute the ultimate possession of the earth to the meek? Will cowardly hearts really enjoy such a blessing? Like, if you're being a coward and don't defend yourself, how can you inherit the earth? Because the violent people are currently taking possession of the earth, right?" And then Jesus doesn't reply right away. He just waits. And then Peter speaks up. And then Peter says, "If an evil Jew were to visit me at home, shouldn't I remind him about the need of mutual respect? Should I give in to him without any sort of admonishment against his criminal whims?" Essentially, Peter is asking, okay, if someone enters in my house to steal or to commit some act of violence against me and my family, should I just be sitting waiting and not doing anything? uh, and then finally Jesus replies, and I will read that excerpt because I don't think I could summarize that on some few topics, so I'll read directly from the book. So the response of Jesus is this: "Of course you are all mistaken. I did not praise laziness, which hides behind the mask of humility, nor cowardliness, which dons the appearance of prudence, in order to better accommodate itself to human conveniences. Individuals who become attached to such artifices will greatly suffer the spiritual measures that the world uses to reform tortuous and indecisive characters. Actually, I was praising the courtesy that we all owe one another. Blessed are the mild mannered who are able to use their constructive energy in a gesture of kindness and a word of understanding. Blessed are the children of balance and kindness, who learn how to deny evil without insulting ignorant neighbors, who request it without knowing what they are asking for. Blessed are those who repeat the same lesson 1,000 times over without boasting about it, so that the neighbor might feel the influence of their action. Blessed are those who know how to deal with the rich and the poor, the wise and the ignorant, the good and evil, with a spirit of service and understanding, giving to each one in accordance with their merits and needs, while leaving traces of improvement, spiritual growth, well being, and contentment wherever they go. In truth, I say to you that they will inherit the spiritual domain of the earth, because all those who welcome their neighbor within the guidelines of love and respect are owners of the hearts that are perfected in the world. So I think Jesus is not telling us to stay lazy. Instead, he is exactly the opposite. We should work with respect to everyone, knowing to listen to everyone, and promote peace to everyone through respect and through the law of love and charity. And I think with that, I will finish my talk for today and open for your questions and comments. No question?
I just would say something different than you said.
Okay.
You said we still need war because we are not ready. I think I would say we still see war, right? We don't need war,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
This world is so crazy those days. I think from every generation or maybe every 2 generations, we see so much violence, I
Hmm.
guess. I think it's unnecessary.
Hmm.
It's just, I agree
Yeah.
with you, we are just not there.
But we're just not there yet.
Yeah.
We still need that to learn. And when we change, when we actually learn it and say we don't need that anymore, why are we fighting for things that will be left behind, like for possessions, for more domain over another person? Like, we're gonna leave all this behind. This is not of the spirit. This is just a passage. When we realize that we don't need to fight, that we actually can live with each other in peace and sharing what the world has to offer. Like, we realize that we don't need war. But while we don't learn that, like, we're still gonna suffer. Like, and this is our own responsibility.
I think when you say need, it's
Mhm.
need in the sense that unfortunate, exactly,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
you didn't understand.
Mhm.
And when attacks, you all end up having to defend,
Mhm.
and then you have a war.
Yeah.
I think that's in the sense that
Mm.
when we read that there's this need
Mhm.
that tends because Zach doesn't know well
Mhm.
when someone attacks.
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm entitled to
Defend. Yeah.
and then it's a war, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, unfortunately,
Mhm.
we
still
need
need
right
it,
now.
yeah.
But exactly like you said, once it gets better, once we understand we do need this,
Mhm.
there's better ways of living
Mhm.
with each other, understand the laws of each other and protection, then we will need that to live in.
Yeah.
Right?
And
Mm.
people say is when, I don't know how to say this in English, but when one doesn't want, how to,
Two doesn't work.
They need to tango.
how,
You should tango.
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
That's what you see in English.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's like how to concatenate that, right? It's like uh, this is partially true, right? My sister works with domestic violence. She support
Mhm.
people under those circumstances.
Mhm.
It's so difficult, right?
Mhm.
I just pray for the blessing of the individual that is under that,
Mhm.
because not necessarily still
Mhm.
humanity. It's there yet.
That's true. Anybody else? No? Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chi. So we should pay a little bit more attention to not be angry, right? So thank you everyone that joined us online. Hope to see you next week with us. And for everyone that is here, we will get prepared to our passes. And if you do not know what the passes are, it's mainly an exchange of fluids. That's it.
Okay,